In this video, I'll be going over the steps I took to make the squirrel signs, colored triangles, and the lighting. The previous video was on the main build of the nut stand, and the next video going up is on the jars, nuts, and labels. I will link to the playlist with all three videos in the description below. Let's start with the triangles. 7mm plywood, paper template as a guide, but I just continued the lines through with a straight edge. Use a thick marker the size of the cutting blade. Then cut out what feels like about 1,000. Set up the bench sander and clean up all the edges. I gave all the triangles a coat of water-based paint, sketched out my color placement plan, contact adhesive on both surfaces, and attach most of the triangles. I still have to do the bottom edge, but I need to do something else first. Moving on to the squirrel. Owen sketched out a few base designs for me.
What you drawing, darling?
A raccoon.
A raccoon? Oh, it's beautiful. What jumper are you wearing?
Gryffindor.
Gryffindor.
I then looked at some photos of squirrels and brought Owen's sketches into the drawing app. I then came up with my squirrel design. He is basically a self-portrait, always grumpy and one tooth longer than the other. I then refined the line art with weighted lines, thicker lines in the shadows and thinner lines in the highlights. BJ Dell has a great tutorial on line weight. I will link to that in the description below. I then started working on a color palette in Photoshop and sizing my line art up to actual size. Print out all the sheets and start taping them together. Cut out the template, then hold in position to check the sizing. I added some paper at the base so I could add the triangles that would appear to be behind him. Traced around my squirrel template, marking little crosses to prevent confusion when cutting. Very carefully cut out the plywood with a jigsaw, then lightly sand the edges. Using carbon paper under the template, I traced over the entire design. I used acrylic paint mixed with drying retarder to paint the squirrel. Very slowly started to block out the base colors. I mixed in some metallics for the acorn because the squirrel obviously treasures it. It's then time to work on the shadows and highlights. Again, BJ Dell has a brilliant tutorial that I watched through several times while painting this guy. I will also link to that video below as well. My highlights weren't vibrant enough, so I went back over them all. Now for the best part, the black lines. You can really start to see it finally becoming something. Flip it over and paint the parts of the back that will be showing black, and get a bigger brush because this is ridiculous. Then take it outside to give it a few clear coats to protect it. For the next sign, I did a few things differently. Firstly, I traced around the template upside down because the jigsaw cuts are cleaner on the underside. I also decided to do an undercoat with watered down PVA glue to make the painting process smoother. 1000 on YouTube has some great videos on this, although he uses gesso. He then also tones his boards to get more accurate colors. So I added some orange paint into my second coat of PVA. Trace over the carbon paper, start blocking in the base colors, shadows and highlights, then the black line art. Clear coats to protect, and a storm is on its way. I ran out of triangles, so I made some more. Contact adhesive them into position. To attach the squirrel, I use leftover triangles as spacers, paint blobs for registration marks, place the squirrel in position. Once you know where they need to be, contact adhesive them to the back of the squirrel. Drill some holes in the backing board, chipboard screws to attach from the underside. Time for the solar-powered LEDs. I am using an old pair of ankle socks to house the solar panels when they are not charging. Attach the socks to the build with a screw at the top. A blob of super glue at each LED and halfway between, and the signage is done. The next video going up is on the jars, nuts, and labels. If you missed the first video, that one was on the build of the nut stand and is linked below. If you liked this video or found it somewhat helpful, give me a thumbs up and I will see you next time.